So Dan, I don't know if you have to be careful about what you say, but I am curious as your thoughts on Billy Napier. Obviously, I know that things haven't necessarily gone according to plan. How does the average Florida fan, or maybe more importantly, Florida booster, I don't know,
Yeah.
feel currently about Billy Napier? And my other question is, will he get any kind of reprieve this season due to, I mean, obviously it's an incredibly tough schedule. Does that give him any kind of leeway?
So the Billy Napier question is complex, right? Because obviously he is still under 500 as head coach at the University of Florida. He took over a pretty disastrous situation from Dan Mullen, from a development perspective, from a strength and conditioning perspective, from a recruiting perspective, probably more than anything. If you look at Florida's roster, almost everybody that played last year, and everybody that played last year and most of the team this year are people that Billy Napier had to bring in either from the transfer portal or guys that he recruited. So you have a lot of sophomores that are playing this year, had a ton of freshmen. I think we were the team with the most freshman snaps in the FBS last year, or somewhere at least the top of the SEC in that number. So, so it was a tough situation to come into, right? So I'll give him a little bit of that. I think where Florida fans are frustrated is that Billy Napier was never known. When Kirby Smart got hired, he was known as the best defensive coordinator in college football, or one of the best defensive coordinators. When Josh Heupel got hired, he was known as one of the best offensive-minded coaches in college football. When Nick Saban got hired, obviously he had his pedigree, an incredible defensive backs coach and defensive coach. So Billy Napier was never this unbelievably well-renowned offensive coordinator, right? He was a wide receiver coach that kind of got passed up on opportunities to be an offensive coordinator, got fired from Clemson, got passed up at Alabama to be an offense coordinator. Ultimately, he ends up at Arizona State and then at Louisiana. And then at Louisiana, he was known for this kind of very structured, organizationally sound program. And that's kind of what you thought you were getting with him, right? It's going to be a clean program that's going to have a good culture. Ultimately, the team is going to be tough. They're going to recruit the line of scrimmage really well. And then, that should work in a talent hotbed like Florida. It's just not really worked out that well. I'll say from a recruiting perspective, he's been able to recruit better than Dan Mullen. I think they figured some things out in the transfer portal a little bit later, over the last maybe year, they figured that out a little bit more. And I think that Billy Napier would have been a much better coach at Florida pre-NIL than they are now, right? So I think that there's still a lot of things that Florida's trying to figure out in NIL and the boosters that want to give to the university or give to NIL, and how stretched do they feel now knowing that Florida for the last 14 years has had very intermittent success. They haven't won the SEC since 2008. And I think they're frustrated now, right? And they're getting to a point where it's like, how much more money do we continue to put into this before it's time to pull the cord on it? That leads us to where Florida's at right now. Scott Strickland's the athletic director. He hired Dan Mullen. That kind of worked out, but ultimately didn't. The Billy Napier experiment so far isn't really working out. So does Scott Strickland then, is he potentially in the hot seat as the athletic director? Because a lot of athletic directors don't get a chance to hire a third football coach. The most latest wrinkle is that Florida's university, or the University of Florida's president, Ben Sass, stepped down a month and a half ago, and now we have an interim president. He's the old president that retired before Ben Sass got hired. So does he feel like it's in his purview to be able to go and fire the athletic director, or what metrics exist for him to potentially make that move, right? So
Right.
Florida finds itself in this very precarious situation where it's like Billy Napier has underperformed. The organizational components seem to be somewhat better internally, but they still are making a lot of errors when it's coming out of big plays. You're calling a lot of timeouts, a lot of delay games. There's multiple infractions of having guys with the same number on the field at the same time, not having enough people on special teams. So the question that you asked at the very beginning is does Florida get or does Billy Napier get a reprieve because of the schedule? At the end of the day, Florida plays the exact same schedule next year, just reversed, right? Instead of Miami at home, now you have to go to Miami, but
Yeah.
everybody in the SEC is the exact same. You still have to play Florida State every year. You have two cupcakes instead of one. We play UCF in a couple of weeks here. So I don't know, but what my biggest fear is as a Florida Gator fan is that it turns from people being like positive about the momentum to now there's a lot of negativity around the program to like,
Right.
when does that negativity turn into apathy? And I think that that's like where Florida can
Yeah.
potentially find itself. And like, Matt, not to like be critical of Tennessee, but like I was talking to two Tennessee fans yesterday at a bar, and it's like, we kind of feel like we're in the exact same situation you guys were before Josh Heupel got hired. And there's like this like new enthusiasm and new energy. But like, that's the hardest part about being a Florida fan is like, okay, fine, you fire Billy Napier, then what? Like, you're going to lose all your good guys to the transfer portal likely. You're going to lose a lot of your recruiting class that's there. Like, what do you do with DJ Lagway, who just had a great game? Like, is he going to leave, right? Like, and you don't make a decision on one person, but like, you can't keep cycling through coaches. Like, Ron Zook was there for 3 years. Urban Meyer was there for 5. Will Muschamp was there for 3.5. Jim McElwain was there for 3. Dan Mullen was there for, yeah, a little bit less than 4, or 4 years. And then now Billy Napier's been there for 3 years. So it's like, since since Steve Spurrier left, your average duration of a coach is like 3 years. That's not sustainable.
Right. And it's the age old question of, if you want to fire him, fine, but who are you going to get? Right.
Right.
And it's starting over every time. So,
And
getting
that was
your guys
that's
in there.
honestly that's my next question for you. Like, let's pretend we're in a universe where he does get let go. Is there a standout, or obviously we're early in the season, but are Florida fans saying, hey, if you were to go, we want so and so? Like, who's the guy or girl? Let's go way out there.
Yeah.
I don't, well, hold on a minute. I don't like the smirk, Dan. What's that all about? You're gonna have to explain that.
No, I don't know who the girl would be. I don't know, right? So Florida historically has never been an athletic department that goes and gets the big guns, right? Steve Spurrier won the ACC twice at Duke, but like not really like super well known. And obviously he played quarterback at Florida, so that makes sense. Urban Meyer's the biggest name that they've gotten, right? They beat Notre Dame out for him. But at that point, he had only had 2 years coaching at Utah. And Utah then is not the Utah that they are now, right? And they didn't have that staying power, right? So even that was like a little bit of, just kind of hedging your bets on this new up-and-comer spread coach. And like, would that work in the SEC? And obviously it did. But Will Muschamp was a defensive coordinator. Jim McElwain was at Colorado State. Billy Napier was at Louisiana. Dan Mullen was at Mississippi State, but he worked with Scott Strickland during when Scott Strickland was the athletic department or director there. In basketball, Billy Donovan was not well known before he got hired. He was at Providence, I believe. Mike White was at Louisiana Tech, and Todd Golden was at the University of San Francisco. Our baseball coach was an assistant at Clemson, right? So like, you think of all of those things and it's like, well, Florida's never gone big game hunting. When Florida had their position open, both Lincoln Riley's representatives and Brian Kelly's representatives reached out to Scott Strickland, and they said no, because they had their mind set on Billy Napier. Obviously that didn't work out. And it's like, would Lincoln Riley or Brian Kelly have worked out better? Like, maybe, but maybe, maybe they're in the exact same situation. So Florida fans seem to be like wondering what they're going to do, right? The hot name is Lane Kiffin. They're like, oh, like he wants the Florida job. He runs the offense that everybody likes. He's got that kind of Steve Spurrier brashness about him. But if Lane Kiffin takes Ole Miss to the playoffs,
he won't go anywhere.
when could you hire him, right? January? Late
Right.
December, January.
Hey, now wait a minute. Now, money talks. I mean, look at the scenario that happened in the College World Series with Texas stealing Texas A&M's baseball coach when they took them to the final. Like, I mean,
yeah,
the semifinal or when it was. Like, money talks. So if Florida backs up the truck and on Lane's back in front stoop and says, "Hey, bring the dog and let's go," like,
yeah, I mean, it could be, right? And what is that Brinks truck that would be backed up, right? What are the dollar amounts? I'll say that, some interesting names that have been kind of thrown around are Ryan Day. If that doesn't work out at Ohio State, or he's ready to move on, if he's not had the success, is that a name? Brian Hartline is a coach that was very, very interested in coaching at the University of Florida. Do you give somebody like him, who has the NFL pedigree? He's obviously the best recruiter in college football right now, or one of the best. Do you give the keys to somebody like him? Do you go after Alex Galesh, who's at USF now, if USF has a good year? But like that's the thing, is like, there's not a lot of like there's 3 coaches coaching right now that have won a national championship: Mac Brown, Kirby Smart, and Dabo Sweeney. Right.
Mhm.
So Ed Orgeron won. He's not going to get hired. Les Miles isn't going to get hired. So it's very, very hard. And like, at what point does Florida just say, we've got to stop signing these massive contracts to people that if they don't work out, we have to pay them, right? Like the fact that Billy Napier got a 7-year, 48 or $50 million contract from Louisiana is egregious to me, right? You're still paying Dan Mullen. Now you're going to potentially have to pay out Billy Napier. Like, how much money is Florida going to throw out their next coach? Or are they going to try to find like that next up and comer again?
I
While they're still
do
paying the old
hear
ones.
that Bill Belichick is available.
Yeah. I mean, Nick Saban's available. Urban Meyer's available.
Don't you dare.
Oh my God!
You
Could
may
you
live
imagine
in
Nick
Florida.
Saban going to
would-
Florida?
I could.
Oh my God.
He's like, absolutely, I can.
Nope. I would be so
Can't.
upset. The field was just named after him. We would tear that stadium down.
You know, I get it.
Um,
You know, Steve Spurrier was the head coach at South Carolina when it was
Yep.
Steve Spurrier Field. So,
Yep.
you know, Nick Saban could be a great, you know, I've watched College Game Day. He looks like he hates sitting next to Pat McAfee. So it might,
And who blames him?
might be time to, you know,
Jeez.
just say, hey, you know, help us turn this thing around for a year or two. Obviously, Nick
That's right.
Saban
He
and
likes a good
Urban
challenge.
Meyer is not coming
I-
back to the University.
No, I have heard people throw that one out there. I'm like, let's calm down. I don't think Urban's gonna come back.
Yeah.
But we never know.